Have you ever made a choice? Someone made a comment on a previous video that was a very good point. And that is, when you tell me to move my attention to this object or this sound or this sensation, or move my attention to a thought, aren't you telling me to make a choice to do that? Right? As John Sherman mentioned in one of his videos, the only choice we probably have is where to move our attention. And then he said, and I'm not even sure we have that choice. And I would argue we don't. But it doesn't really matter as far as practice is concerned. You don't have to concern yourself with whether or not there's free will, how attention moves, how I make choices about where to move my attention to wake up. The awakening process very much unfolds in a step-by-step fashion, wherein the insights themselves reveal these truths in due time. So to try to understand non-doership or non-agency before the insight is clear is kind of an endeavor in futility. You might be able to logically convince yourself of it or see some logical framework that makes it make sense, but you still won't have the insight. So generally speaking, I recommend working on awakening, then investigating the nature of reactivity, then investigating the nature of duality, meaning looking into the perceptual filters that make reality seem divided up, that cause the sense of a separate self that gets extrapolated into an agent. Now, on occasion, I will talk about these issues in a philosophical way just because it's interesting, but always remember that insight has to come first when it comes to this process. Understanding won't do it. And in fact, you can actually confuse yourself with understanding because you can become convinced you understand realization, non-doership, non-agency, any of it, and mistake that for the insight itself. And that's a grave error if you really want to wake up. So with all that said, let's look into how attention moves. So let's start with a hypothetical situation. Let's say you're walking down the street and you don't notice I'm standing on the other side of the street. And then I call your name. I say, hey. When your attention moves to me, was there a moment before your attention moved where a thought came up and said, okay, I have a choice of whether to move my attention to the voice that just called me or to ignore it and pretend it didn't happen? There's no choice there. The attention just moved, yeah? Now, what happens is the mind extrapolates this into this narrative that says, well, you chose to call my name, and then when I turned to look at you, then I chose whether I'm going to shout back to you, walk over, or just keep walking. The mind always finds the territory it's more comfortable in, so you could assign volition to me on the other side of the street deciding to call your name, or that I somehow manipulated your attention to move toward me. But what if it was a loud bird on the other side of the street and it squawked very loudly and your attention suddenly turned? Does the bird have volition and choice? Or what if it was an explosion that caused your attention to suddenly turn in that direction? Clearly that doesn't have volition or choice. And the sudden shock of that sound, and maybe even the vibration of the explosion, immediately moved your attention in that direction without a conscious thought deciding whether or not the attention would move in that direction. So in these examples, it's pretty obvious how this works. However, once we're downstream a little bit, once I start talking about practice and I say, hey, move your attention to the sounds, and your attention moves to the sounds. Hey, move your attention to thought, and your attention moves to thought. Then you can have an afterthought saying, well, I chose to do that, but did you? For instance, I might say, move your attention to the sound, and then you do it. And I say, okay, now move your attention to the sensation in your foot. And instead of your attention moving to the sensation in your foot, it moves to a thought, and the thought says, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. Well, who chose that? I didn't choose that, and you didn't choose that. That's just where the attention went. So our attention actually just moves all over the place all the time. But when we talk in this way, there's a suggestion that it can move in certain ways that reveal certain insights. But that doesn't mean that there's anybody here in this body that knows that. It doesn't mean there's anyone here that chose to say that. And we use language all the time to overlay a story or a narrative onto something where there is no story or narrative. This voice speaks, those ears hear, and maybe or maybe not they register what's being said, and maybe or maybe not attention moves in certain ways. That's how this works. It comes out of nowhere. It happens for no reason. And when the realization of non-duality is clear, you see in real time that that's how it is. These conditions, whatever they are just creating the experience of what we call reality. Appearances appearing out of nowhere. There's not even distance or separation. There's no division. There's no individual. So how can one individual act on another individual or act on an environment? This is all extrapolated in thought, but it's not found in direct experience. It's not found in the immediate flow of experience. It's like spontaneous arising. Things just come out of nowhere. Who knows where they come out of? Who knows where appearances arise from or whether they arise at all? It's just an experience. It's just sound, just sensations. And this becomes very, very clear at a certain stage of realization. It's just undeniable. But you also see how the mind puts it together and how the pull of thought is very strong. So if someone spends a lot of their time in thought trying to put the world together in a logical way, an understandable way, a predictable way, a sequential way, to try to convince them that that's not happening is kind of like, again, an exercise in futility. So I generally avoid it. But just because the thoughts are telling that story doesn't mean it's actually what's happening. And that's what we're pointing to. The realization of non-duality is very radical. I was messaging with someone yesterday who essentially dissolved into that reality. And she was very astounded. And this is someone who's been at this for years and years and has a good understanding of it all and has a lot of insight. But it's still very surprising when it's like, wow, this is just coming out of nowhere. There's nothing here. There's no one here. There's nothing to do. This is all just spontaneous action. There's no distance, no volition. There's just this. But what even is this? It's crazy. It's really radical, experientially. And yet, it's so natural. It's just obviously how this is. So the non-choice, non-doership thing is tricky, especially when you look at attention and you believe I'm the one moving attention. But just notice, get really, really close to attention itself and ask yourself, who's actually moving it? Is there someone apart moving the attention, or is the attention just moving? And is there even anything called attention that's like a separate entity, like a flashlight or an awareness that's shining onto things? Or is there just the experience of sound, sensation, color, form, right? So what becomes clear at some point is even attention is a thought. But when there's a sense of doership, agency, it's a reasonably valuable thought. It's a belief that at least it seems like you can utilize to focus your attention into certain aspects of experience and inquire, is there actually a doer? Is there a hearer? Is there hearing? Or is there just that sound? Does the sound exist somewhere out there, in here? Does it have solidity? Is there agency? Where's the hearer? Where's the sound being heard from? Where's it beginning and where's it ending? What does it mean? Where does meaning get assigned? Who assigns meaning or purpose to anything? These kinds of inquiries are extremely powerful. But when you're in the midst of the inquiry itself, is there a doer? Is there someone choosing to inquire, or is there just pure inquiry? When you really lean into inquiry, it's more like a simple fascination with the appearances. You don't have to extrapolate a doer. You don't have to extrapolate or impute a practitioner. Just inquiry, just sound, sensation, feeling, just thought. No big deal. Now, as a bonus, I remember a few years ago watching a video of Rupert Spira talking to somebody about choice. And he points out in a very clever way the absence of choice when it comes to thoughts. I'll put the link to that video at the end of this one.